Hi, everybody. My name is Buddy Gott, and this is Buddy's Book Buddies, my new podcast that is all about books and writing. And today I've got a writer with me who writes both nonfiction and fiction, and his name is Mark Shaiken. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thanks a lot, buddy. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Just to let my audience know, Mark and I actually got to know each other through writing. We both write on Medium, and Mark had written. I run a publication there called Plethora Pop that's about pop culture, and you'd written a couple pieces there, and you've got so many varied interests, and it's funny. I think I know so many people who are into writing fiction who also love playing music, and I know you wrote a fantastic piece called "The Guitar and Me," which is about your, I guess, lifelong love of music and playing guitar. That was a great piece.
Correct.
You've been playing
Thanks.
guitar for a long time, huh?
A very long time, although it's a me thing. I'm not touring. I'm not in a band. I just go down to the basement every day and rock out and then come back up.
I think that's awesome. That's the kind of the way I want to do it. I actually have a guitar here in the corner that I've had for a few years that I don't know how to play yet, but I want to start taking lessons or
Yeah,
watching the millions of YouTube videos that are out there and just play for fun. So when I talked about writing, has writing been something you've loved doing for a long time?
it is. I when I was I think a junior or so in college, my dad cornered me, and I said this is back in the I'm going to date myself here, but back in the mid '70s, and wanted to know what my plan was for the rest of my life after I got done spending his money to go to college. And I had no idea, so I came up with a plan A and B. And A was I was going to follow the New York Mets around the country and photograph them
Oh, that's not bad.
for the Daily News, and the other and B was I would write the not so great American novel when I graduated, and both of those landed on the cutting room floor quickly. And so eventually I went to law school as sort of the great compromise, not something I had ever intended to do, and set aside the whole idea of writing until much later in life, 40 years later. I left the practice of law and was able to sit down and to start fulfilling the idea that I would write books.
Well,
So
I think
the book part's pretty recent in my life. Yeah.
Well, I think that's pretty wonderful that, you had that love early on and you came back to it. And, a lot of people, unfortunately, will never go back to things that, they had a passion for when they were younger for any number of reasons. But I think that's great that you had well, obviously, you said you practiced law for many, many years, close to 40 years. Is that what you said?
Yep. 4 decades. Right.
Wow, that's fantastic. And when was it that you left law? That was fairly recently, I guess.
So I left in 2019. I gave up going to court in 2019, and just in time for the pandemic, so my timing was perfect. But on the other hand, the plan to sit down and start writing worked well in the pandemic because I was at home in our small condo and high above downtown Denver, and it was as good a thing as any to do all day. Because there really wasn't much else that you can do, as you might remember.
Oh yeah, it was
Seems like a
forever.
lifetime ago, but just
It
a few
does.
years. Yeah,
My wife and I were just saying that the other day. It's like it's hard to believe that was just a few years ago.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but now let me ask you this then, since you said you got back into the writing, then had you dabbled at all? I mean, now I know as a lawyer you do a lot of writing, so you.
Right. So, as a lawyer, you write nonfiction, or at least you hope that the judge believes it's nonfiction. Otherwise, you're going to have a problem if the judge reads it and thinks it's fictional.
Right.
But you write constantly. So the discipline and the practice of learning how to sit down and meet a deadline and write what you need to write and have a page limit or a page requirement is just baked into being a lawyer. And so as a training ground to then leave the practice of law and have a routine to sit down and write, it was great. But I had never written fiction. At least that was my hope, that no one read it and thought it was fiction when it was going to the court. And my first reaction to the fiction writing was, this is great. Write books, fiction. And then I immediately thought, what the hell do I know about fiction? I mean, I've never written it before. I've never created characters. I've always been, given a case that had the facts already.
Right. Right.
And the whole process of overthinking, because that's, kind of what lawyers get paid to do, overthinking through what it took to write a fiction novel it took a while for me to sort of gather my thoughts and figure out how to do it. And the truth is, the first book I wrote, Fresh Start, I really like it, but I think the last book I wrote, Cram Down, so the fourth in the series, is better. And I think it's better because I'm a little better at the process. And I'm pleased about that.
Well,
Yeah.
that's wonderful. I mean, I've heard that from other writers too, who will not only write series like you have done with your 3J series, but with, standalone books too, that, it's like anything, I suppose. The more you do it, the more comfortable you become with
Right.
it. I know, I haven't published anything yet myself, but I also write fiction, and I look at short stories that I wrote even 5 years ago compared to the ones I have written recently, and there's just such a big difference between them. It's probably because you feel better about your writing.
Exactly.
You kind of learn some tricks and maybe feel more confidence in what you're doing, and hopefully that comes through.
I agree completely, and the other thing is to stop angsting over it and just start doing it.
Yeah.
And when I got to that point, I was able to sit down at the computer and to start doing it. And I mean, I started with a memoir of a not famous lawyer, as I call it, which was my path into and out of the practice of law. And once I got that off my chest, that one I kind of wrote for me to
Right.
to to get it off my chest, the 40 years of waiting to sit down and write. Then I started in on the legal thriller, financial thriller series, and I just have had a blast with it.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Before we get into the series, I just want to talk one more, just a little bit more about the book you just mentioned, your nonfiction book. I love the title of it. It's And Just Like That, the essays on a life before, during, and after the law. That's fantastic. Did you
And
want to
that's
sue the HBO series when they came up with that show and just like that?
so a friend of mine wrote me and asked if I'd given a release to Sex in the City to come back and do it. And of course I didn't. You can't copyright titles, so that's
No.
not a big deal. But they also seem to use the same font that was on the front of my book. So someday
Ah, okay.
I'll figure out if they ever read it. I kind of doubt it. But for me, and just like that represented what my life has been. Things just happen that are different than the things that I think I've planned for, and they're happening on path A as I'm planning on path B, and path B is not happening. So um,
Right, right.
that's kind of how I got into the law. That's kind of how I got out of the law, just like that.
Oh, that's fantastic. That sounds like a great book. And let's talk about the legal thrillers then. It's the 3J legal thrillers. Now, before I
Right.
ask you too much about this, you said you hadn't been writing. Were you a big fan of reading legal thrillers throughout your life, or fiction in general?
Fiction for sure. I was an American Studies major in college, so that's literature, American literature, and so yes, fiction and literature has always been a place to go to
Mm.
shut out the rest of the world and just read the book, and so I do enjoy that. Um, Legal thrillers. So let's start with TV. I try very hard not to watch, except for a couple of exceptions, the law shows on TV because it can drive me crazy because
Oh, I
that's not
imagine it can.
if you try to pack a whole trial into 48 minutes, not including the commercials in a series, you have to compress a lot of things out. And so I might think that's not really what a trial looks like. I do love the Lincoln Lawyer, Michael Connolly's series
I haven't
I
read or
think
seen that.
it's either on, I think that's on Amazon Prime.
Oh, okay.
And it's great because they're not as constrained and they've done a decent job of portraying more authentically what would happen in a trial. And so I'm safe if that's in that presentation and enjoyed and like everything else that Connolly does, it's just amazingly well crafted.
I have not read him yet, but I have three or four of his novels on the bookshelves back here. My wife and I have both bought them with the intention of reading them, and that's going to happen very soon. And it's funny, I was actually going to ask you how you felt about TV shows and movies with the law, because my wife, she's not a lawyer, but she's worked in law firms for over 30 years. She was an
Mhm.
admin assistant. Now she has another job within them. But sometimes we'll be watching a show and I don't know if you're familiar with So Help Me Todd. It's a show that ran recently. It was took place in a law firm, And I liked it, but sometimes we'd be watching it and we'd be halfway through it, and she would just hit the pause button. She'd be like, "Okay, I realize it's fiction, but this would never happen this way in real life. This would not really happen in court this way."
And that's what I do, and it drives my wife crazy when I do that. So we sort of agreed that if there is a law show that she wants to watch, she can watch it on her own, so I don't, ruin it for her. But I mean but it's an interesting topic of how authentic to make something, because
Yeah.
the bulk of the people that are either going to read the book or see the TV or movie shows aren't lawyers. And so how much authenticity do you want to have in the book when you have a courtroom scene? How much of what, quote, really, unquote, goes on in court are you going to, in my case, put in the book? I want the scenes to be authentic. I want the dialogue to be authentic, between the lawyers or the clients and or the bankers in my case. Um, but on the other hand, you can do an overkill and make it too authentic. So the lawyer reading public will write you and say, "This is great. It's so authentic. I loved it." I had
Right.
a similar case. The non-lawyer public will, tell you that they're snoozing through it because it's too much. So one of the things that I think I am still learning, but I'm getting better at, is trying to balance that. Um,
Mhm.
Authenticity of what I would do in court versus what I think, my star character 3J, Josephina Jillian Jones, what she would do in court. I want, when she does something in court in the book, I want it to be correct and I want it to be authentic, but I also don't want to overkill what she does in
Right.
court.
Yeah, and I think whether it's a legal thriller or really any kind of book, you kind of have to maybe walk a fine line there as a
Right.
writer. I know I a few years ago had read a book that it was a novel, but it was written by someone who worked in the music industry, and he actually worked as a sound engineer. And he actually worked one of his stories around this, but it got so very technical with that kind of
Mm.
stuff, like what was going on into the recordings of albums, that it would go on for 3 or 4 pages. And even me as a music lover, I'm like, okay, this is great. And I'm sure that like if I knew what you were talking about, I would thoroughly enjoy this. But let's move the story forward, or maybe quote unquote dumb it down for me. And yeah, I
Yeah,
guess it's a fine line that any writer has to walk.
it is. If you're writing a crime beat novel, and you're following, and your star is, one of the detectives, um, you have to make that same decision as the
Yeah.
author. If you're writing a medical novel, same thing. You can go through all of the different disciplines, and it would be the same question that comes up. How much that do I tell people who don't know the details of what goes on in the recording studio, or what all the sliders
Yeah.
mean, or do?
It's
Yeah.
interesting, and it's
Yeah.
a thing that I guess a lot of people, a lot of readers don't think about, and a lot of writers might lose sight of until someone maybe points it out to them, saying, "Okay, you might want to change something here." And we've mentioned 3J a couple times here. I love the name. The 3J stands for is it Josephina Jillian Jones? Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
I love that. I love
Yes.
any history of the Josephina. Did that? It's such a unique name.
Yeah. Jillian, there's some history. When my wife, got pregnant, we were kicking names around and we didn't know the gender of the kid yet. And Jillian was one of the names that we were kicking around. Josephina, yeah, I've met, surprisingly, several of them in my life, and
Oh, okay.
I just like the way the name rolls off the tongue.
Great name.
So, uh, I don't fully know how I came up with the name, just like I don't fully know how I come up with some of the storylines either. They're just there. But that name, I just liked the way that the nickname sounded. And
Yeah.
she's the kid from New Orleans who, per her father's hope, took the education train out and not the graduation train back. So she went to a small college in the state of Washington, ended up in law school in Kansas, and then got hired by this Kansas City law firm that she now works at. Green Madison is the fictional name. So all of the books are set in Kansas City.
Oh, okay. Now I know you live in Colorado now. Did you used to
Yep.
be in that area in the Kansas
Yeah.
City? Yeah.
We were lived in Kansas City for more than 25 years before we moved out here to Denver, and loved it. And it's actually not a place that people typically go for, vacation or fun. So it's kind of a flyover city, but it's a great place. The food, the barbecue is, I'm sorry, Texas, sorry, Tennessee, but the barbecue in Kansas City is not like anything else in the world. It's amazing. And it's a big jazz center, especially the historical place that jazz holds in America. Count Basie started there.
And as a music lover, I'm
Charlie
sure you
Parker grew up
thoroughly
there,
enjoyed
and
all that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's super historical, and they may not even do enough to honor that history in Kansas City. It's still got a good jazz presence, but you have to dig a little to remind yourself of just what place it held in jazz history. And the Civil War, which I don't know that people recognize this unless you're from that area, but the Civil War broke out on the Kansas-Missouri border years before the Civil War broke out in the rest of the United
Oh, I
States.
didn't realize that. Wow.
Yeah, because Missouri was a slave state, and came into the Union under something called the Missouri Compromise of 1820. And
Oh,
Kansas was a free state when it came into the Union. And so one side didn't have slavery, one side did, and there were these skirmishes on the border years before the Civil War actually broke out. And Kansas City was an epicenter of many of those battles.
oh,
Um,
very interesting. Very
so I try to
interesting.
weave all of that into each
Oh,
of the
that's
stories.
wonderful.
Yeah.
As a writer, I mean, do you like doing a lot of research? I imagine, some of the things you do require a lot of research. To me, it sounds like you may be a bit of a history buff and might
Yeah.
really thoroughly enjoy that.
Yeah, the major was American History and American Lit. Yeah, the I do. I never want to get an email, and so far, luckily, knock on wood, I haven't, from somebody that's a super historian that says that's completely wrong. I don't want
Right.
to get that email after
No,
somebody
of
reads
course
the
not.
book. And so far, nobody has taken the time to write that to me, or I'm doing an okay job of the research. But the research onto the Civil War is stuff you can do online, and some of that I know. I just want to make sure I have the actual battle story correct.
Right.
The each book has one or more flashbacks to 3J's childhood in New Orleans.
Oh, okay.
And that is a place we go every year, but not because of the books. We just love to go there and eat ourselves into oblivion in New Orleans and listen to the music. And so,
Wonderful.
for the last couple of years, we've found a tour guide that was an American history major. So she takes us around. I give her a list of what I want to know,
Oh,
and
great.
so that does pop up in the books. But that,
That's great that you have a personal connection, with
yeah,
there, with Kansas City, and
yeah.
that's great. It makes the books, I'm sure, much more authentic. And why don't we just, you've written 4 books so far in this series. Why don't we just cover, well, basically, you've told us a little bit about 3J, but the first book I just wanted to touch upon that is Fresh Start. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah.
How's the whole series start off for us, Mark?
Um, 3J is a bankruptcy lawyer in this large firm, and she usually represents the borrower. And usually it's a business corporate bankruptcies. And in that case, her client is a real estate developer who has moved to Kansas City from Philadelphia to get out of the limelight. And he builds skyscrapers around the world. So he has a large loan from a bank group. And um, you learn pretty quickly in the book that he hides assets,
Uh,
which is a huge no-no in bankruptcy. So he's hiding them from 3J, doesn't tell her about it. So he's lied to her. He's hiding it from the court, felony. He's hiding them from the whole bankruptcy system, felony.
wow.
And the lead banker in the case is a woman. The bank is from St. Louis, and she in her she has one of those visceral gut reactions. She knows he's doing something, but she can't figure out what, and she can't
Right.
prove it. And so the theme of the book is, how far will the banker go to catch a felon? Will she commit a felony to catch the
Ah,
felon?
okay. Oh, that sounds
So
really good.
that's kind of the hook of the book.
Nice, nice.
She's she's kind of hideous. So she's kind of a bad guy, a bad good
Mm.
guy, I guess, because it's not her fault that he's a felon. He's kind of a good bad guy, because you kind of like him even though he's committing this massive
Oh, I
felony.
love those kind of bad guys.
Yeah. And that's something that I enjoy. I enjoy creating characters that are conflicted. So I
Hmm.
don't have even 3J. I don't have too many good guys and bad guys.
Hmm.
They're usually some combo of the good and bad. And I enjoy that kind of character.
Yeah, I do too. Whether it's well, in any kind of fiction, in a book or a TV show or a movie, and in real life too. I mean, I think bad guys don't view themselves as being bad.
No,
They're
no.
good guys. They're the hero of their own story. And just like, I think a lot of the ones who maybe view themselves as being, some sort of great good hero aren't like, Snow White or anything. Everybody's we're all very, very full of different kinds of things.
Yeah. I mean, in the newest book, in Cram Down, there's a new character, a mob, the head of a mob organization, Robbie McFadden, who went to Wharton. He runs the organization like a business,
Ah,
and that's his favorite, phrase when he's setting up a hit. Nothing personal, it's just business.
I
And
love that.
but you find yourself in the book liking him, so he's a good bad guy. And he has two guys working for him. One's a complete hitman. That might be my first bad guy. But
Oh, okay.
in Cram Down,
Nice.
I actually kill a couple of folks off without saying who they are,
Yeah, don't say who they
giving
are.
away a spoiler. But that was
I've got these all on my Kindle right now, so don't say
okay.
much.
Uh, that was actually a fun from a writing perspective to have this, ultimate power to just eliminate people in the book.
Oh, that is fantastic. It sounds like I could
Yeah,
tell you had a lot of fun with that.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was fun. Yeah,
And like I said, there's four books so far, Fresh Start, and then was it Automatic Stay, the next?
yeah.
Okay.
Automatic Stay. You would like that one because six jazz clubs go
Oh,
under.
nice.
And that one is probably the most music oriented of any of them.
Okay.
3J is a huge lover of jazz. She has a Sonos system in her apartment and goes back after a hard day and just tries to melt into the music.
Nice.
And um, in that book, I touch on mental illness. The
Oh, okay.
lender's got a problem that he's had since childhood. So her job is to save the six clubs and save live jazz, in the city. In
Wow.
doing so, yeah.
You got a nice mix of storylines in these books.
Uh,
I love
I
that.
hope when you sit down to read them, I hope you like them.
I bet
Certainly
I
email
will.
me.
I will. I will.
Yeah, yeah,
And next one is Unfair Discrimination. That's a
yeah.
great. All of these are great titles. I assume some of these are actually come from legal terms involving bankruptcy,
All of
right?
the titles come from the bankruptcy code, every
Okay,
one
that's
of
what
them.
I'm looking
So
at.
yeah,
I'm like I see something here.
bankruptcy law or bankruptcy code. So that, the unfair discrimination, you would think, well, what kind of discrimination would be fair?
Right.
But as it turns out, that's a phrase right out of the bankruptcy code. So when I taught bankruptcy at the University of Kansas for 14 years, we would get to this part of the bankruptcy code, and I would preempt the comments that were about to come from the students by saying, in the world, all discrimination is unfair, but in bankruptcy, there is some discrimination that's okay.
Ah, okay.
And I won't give away what that kind is, but
Yeah.
that's where the title comes from. And in that book, she has to represent a committee of creditors who nominate one of the creditors to be the chair of the committee, and that chair is a white nationalist.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
3J is black,
Hmm.
and so a huge conflict immediately begins in the representation because
Oh, I can imagine.
you can imagine, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Wow. Wow. That
that
sounds
one
really
that one
good
kind of
too.
touches a lot on the haters in the world.
Hmm. Well,
Yeah,
there's far too many of them, that's for sure.
yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah. And let me ask you this then. You had mentioned that she is black, and I just, I don't, I'm not going to ask you this. It's more of just like a statement or observation I'm going to make. I personally, love that your main character is a black woman because I know I read like a lot of other writers and even readers. You hear things about, maybe what writers should do and what they shouldn't do. And I've seen so much advice given to writers saying, if you're a man, don't write about a woman. If you're a white person, don't write about a black person. Write what you know. Don't write what you don't know. And see, I don't buy too much into that because I know, I as a writer want to write about things that I want to know about. I have an interest in, and I like that. You've written a character who it seems like you have some similarities. You both have a history in the law and bankruptcy, but hats off to you for writing someone that is not a lot like you.
yeah. Well, I mean, this is an interesting topic, and I guess I would address it this way. Obviously, I'm not a woman, and I'm not black. On the other hand, I'm a huge proponent of diversity. And if all I did was write books about old white guys, because I'm an old white guy, it wouldn't be the world I live in. It wouldn't be the
Right.
friends that I have. So then the next question is, does that mean that my star should be white and I should have a smattering of black women in the book who have a minor role? And I don't want to do that either.
No.
I want the characters to represent what my world has been, even if that's not what every white male's world has been. On the other hand, I need to be careful and respect that I can observe how hard it is to be a black woman in a white law firm and try to make your way up the ladder to become partner.
Hmm.
And it ain't easy. And I
No.
can see that, but I
Sure.
don't know what it's like because I'm
Yeah.
not a black woman.
Right.
And so I need to make sure that in telling 3J's story, I don't presume to then explain how she feels, and exactly what it's like to be a black woman trying to make their way through the glass ceiling in a large law firm.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. An awful
And
lot of sense.
I hope I can do that without, offending anybody. So far, that's not a topic that has um, bothered anybody who's managed to write a review. Um,
That's fantastic. That's
so
fantastic.
maybe I've balanced it correctly. I hope so, because that is important to me. I mean, I grew up in the inner city, so I didn't live in a white suburb,
Right.
and yet I'm still a white person. And so, when people get judged based on the color of their skin, I slide through because I'm white.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I
yeah.
can understand what you mean. I mean, I went to a high school actually. The one that I had gone to, it actually had been like the big primary, like all black school for many, many years in this area. And then when I went, it was just a few years after, that, whites and others started going there as well. And it was primarily black when I went. So while I can, had a lot of friends who were black and, uh, I can only relate so much,
Right.
but, I think there's a, probably maybe a, well, I don't know. There's a risk. I think having been in that situation, maybe I can. I'm going to stop myself there because I don't want to sound like I'm patting myself on the back too much.
Yeah.
But I'm just like you. I have lived in a city. I've been in a school that had a high black population, so I can relate to things, but of course, never fully understand them.
Right. Right. And hopefully, by creating a character that way, as people read it, they get to see, 3J as a top of her game, lawyer.
Right, right, and
and
I
and
have
not top of her game black woman lawyer,
yeah.
just the top of her game lawyer that anyone would want to hire, including this white nationalist who just wants his money back.
Exactly. And I was skimming through. Now, when I want to read books, I don't read reviews all the way through because I don't want to have anything spoiled for me. But skimming through the reviews I've seen of your books, like you said, no one seems to have any problems with her in
Yeah,
any of those kinds of regards. I mean, people seem to love the stories, and they really
yeah.
grab a hold of them, which is wonderful. It's got to be so fun for you, really.
Oh,
After
I'm having a blast. I mean, if you dream about something for a long time and then you finally get to do it, it's a moment because maybe you'll be terrible at it, and so you'll
right.
realize what a dumb dream this has been for all these decades. And then when you do put it out there, you get review. People do read it. That's the object. And then they review you, which is the modern, way of everybody can be a critic.
Right.
And you hold your breath a little bit during that part of the process because maybe everybody hates it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really this whole interesting process for and like you said, well, 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 I'm kind of losing my words here. Sorry about that. Just that, to me, it's fascinating. I'm just so excited for you without even having read these books yet. Someone who wants to write, I actually am outlining right now a murder mystery series that I want to do where I have a main character who is a
Hmm.
private investigator. So like you, it's a series that I want to
Hmm.
do. I've got a lot of ideas for, I'm excited for, but I have those same kinds of fears that you just mentioned, whether it would, connect with people, whether people would like it, whether people are going to say that I suck, those kinds of things. But
Hmm.
I want to
Yeah.
have the excitement that you are explaining there. It seems like you've just been having so much fun.
In the new book, there's a whole section on writing and me. And some of the chapters are, why write, just write, because
Hmm.
one of the other problems of, having a life of a lawyer, you have to think through every imaginable permutation of what might happen if you do something so that you've considered everything as much as
Right.
you can. So that would include sitting down to write as opposed to just sit down and write and let's see what happens.
Right.
That's not really something that lawyers do. They don't just winging it is not really part of the training.
No, winging it could be very, very bad. I can imagine. The last book that well, not last, but the last one so far is Cram Down, right? That came out last year. Is
Cram
that
Down
right?
came out end of September
That's a great
this
title.
past year. Again, part of the bankruptcy code. In Cram Down, 3J represents a fictional nonprofit company that builds houses for members of the marginalized community. So,
Okay.
lower middle class Americans who can't seem to access the American dream. In some respects, um, the name of the company is Abode LLC, and in some respects, it's a somewhat loosely based on Habitat for Humanity, which
Oh,
builds
okay.
homes
Yeah.
for marginalized communities. And the loan that company, that Abode has, is from the only Black-owned bank in Kansas City, a family-owned bank, which in the industry is called a community bank. And the bank's been in the family since the late 1800s. It's now owned by the two remaining brothers, who are very different. Amadi Brown, who wants to continue the bank's quest of being a member of the community and supporting the community by making a loan like this, and his brother Jordan, who just wants money in his pocket. And
Oh, okay.
this type of loan's not profitable enough for him, and so the two go at it. And uh, at, by a set of circumstances that you'd have to read the book to appreciate, Jordan becomes the controlling owner of the bank
Oh, okay.
and wants this loan from Abode out. He wants it collected, money in his pocket, and who cares if there's any homes built for underprivileged people anymore? He needs to take that cash and make it more profitable through
Wow.
a desire to enter into the crypto market. Uh,
Wow. You've got
so
some fantastic plots in your books.
yeah,
Seriously.
yeah, I have no idea where they come from.
Well, let me ask you this then, related to that. Now, when you start a book, how much of an idea for it do you have before you start writing? Do you have a great deal of it figured out beforehand?
A whole bunch of it I do. I don't outline it to the degree that every single word, twist,
Hmm.
interaction is there.
Right,
But the beginning, eh, how it starts and how it's going to end, and what the problem is, and who the borrower is, and who the bad guys in the book are, I largely do.
that's
Um,
great.
and that may also be a lawyer thing because what you're taught as a lawyer is to do detailed outlines before you actually sit down to write whatever you're going to write,
Right,
and then make sure the outline it is cohesive. It's it flows and it follows together. And I find that helpful in the world of fiction, maybe even soothing because it takes a little of the fear away
right.
from where this is going. But not everything. So not all the dialogue or things like that. And the dialogue, so as a lawyer, you never write dialogue. It's
Hmm.
not part of the gig. And I didn't know how to write dialogue other than I knew how to talk and listen and hear
Hmm.
people talk back to me. So the way
Sure.
I write dialogue isn't to outline it, but is to sit at my computer and speak both parts out loud
Oh,
and
great.
kind of hear what it sounds like. So if you walk by my computer when I was writing, you'd probably think I was crazy because you would hear people arguing with each other or talking to each other and
I think
noodling
that's a
through,
brilliant way to do it, though. That's wonderful.
or my mobster, ordering a hit on somebody because it's just business.
That's funny. That's funny. It's funny. I mentioned earlier that my wife has worked at law firms for a long time, and she's told me that really, like the best lawyers that she's worked with have been fantastic writers.
Mm,
Because she's known a couple of her coworkers, lawyers, who have said that when they retire, they maybe wanted to write novels, and she's like, "You should do it. You should do it
mhm.
because well, she knows the things that you just said. I mean, you have to make what you write as a lawyer has to be very compelling to judges and to others. So." I can see how and why so many lawyers have turned into famous writers.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know if I'm a famous writer, but we can hope that someday, someday I'll get a call from Hollywood and they'll tell me that they're ready to make a series out of it.
And I did, we touched it. You mentioned your next book, and that's it's coming out shortly, isn't it? It's what
Yeah,
makes
next,
me me.
yeah. So what makes me me is just like the things I've been doing on Medium. I tend to, even when I'm not writing one of the 3J books, I tend to keep a list of topics for things that have nothing to do with 3J to someday write about. And so I
Mhm.
sat down, really just as I was joining Medium, I also sat down and started writing essays
Oh wow.
without really knowing, okay, well, how are they even connected?
Hmm.
Because you could look at the topics and think, well, that's kind of random one after the other. There's nothing that sort of glues them together. But I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed sort of the genre of writing 800 to 1,000 words and then being done with it and moving to the next topic, which is quite a bit different than the novel writing. And I enjoyed the idea that I could figure out later how they were connected.
Yeah, that's
Um,
wonderful.
so I have a list. I have even more of a list now of 800 word, not 1,000 word topics to address, ranging from that I'm colorblind. So that's one of the chapters in the book.
Oh,
All
okay.
all the way all the way to some poetry I've written, and all the way to something that I've carried around with me for a very long time because it was what how I reacted to my dad rejecting Plan A and Plan B, which was
Oh,
with
okay.
complete respect for him, but we had just read some Ralph Waldo Emerson stuff in college, and what the quote that I carried around was to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment.
Oh, I love
Uh,
that.
and yeah, it's a great quote,
Yeah, it's
very
wonderful.
applicable to me. And then the Beatles, not the Beatles, and the Eagles came along, in the 70s and recorded Already Gone. And there's a line in there that was, so oftentimes it happens that we live our life in chains and we never even know we have the key. And I
Oh,
don't,
yes.
I, I don't want to say that being a lawyer was like being in chains for 40 years, but it really wasn't the plan.
Right,
And
right.
there are things out there that speak to you. So I make a list of things like that, and then I can write as a springboard, use the quote as a springboard to write a piece. And I did, and I
Oh,
enjoy
that's
that.
wonderful. I had seen
Yeah.
you had shared somewhere like maybe a bit of an early review that you had for this book, and I love that someone had written that they said that your storytelling makes you feel as if you're having a conversation with a close friend who has much wisdom to impart. That
Yeah,
had to have made you
that's
feel
nice.
good. Yeah, that's really nice.
And that might have been, I had this idea that, if you sit around a campfire up in the mountains in Colorado, you're sort of with friends, you're sort of reminiscing with them and
Yeah.
telling stories, some true, some not, some blown out of proportion, some accurate. And so I was pleased when some of the pre-release reviews started to come in and sort of picked up on that, that
That's
you felt
fantastic.
felt like you were just talking to a friend that was telling you a bunch of stories. And that was the hope, that is the hope for what makes me me. So um,
Well, that's
hopefully that
great.
hopefully that's what the rest of the reading world will see and feel when it comes out and they read it.
Well, I wish you all the luck in the world with that,
Yeah, thank you.
and you're welcome. And with the, I assume you want to keep writing the 3J series too. It sounds like you're having so
Yeah,
much fun with that, and you already have a bunch of other ideas for it going
yeah.
forward.
Next one is for cause, also a phrase out of the bankruptcy code, and yeah, and that one will start to it. One of the themes of that book will be deep fake videos.
Oh, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. You,
So I have some learning to do because I am by far not an expert at the moment on deep fake videos. Just find the topic fascinating that, there's software now that can, take me and make me say whatever they want and then post it
yeah,
on the internet. Yeah.
it's very interesting and fascinating and kind of scary.
It's very scary, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
And
is.
so the question will be what happens when one of those videos shows up as a piece of evidence in court?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Oh, I love that. I really love that. And speaking of books, now this is only the second episode of Buddies Book Buddies, but starting with this episode, you're going to be my first person with this, Mark, where I want to ask people, what they have been reading lately, or maybe what their plan is to read next. Sort of like a book recommendation to
Yeah.
my audience.
Um, I haven't yet read all of Michael Connelly's Harry Bosch series, or
Ah, okay.
but I've made a good dent in it, and so whenever I'm looking for something to read, I can just run back and read something from Connelly and be a pretty happy person. I don't know what it is. He writes with the precision of a Dashiell Hammett. The stories are amazing, and um, and they're very authentic because he was a crime beat reporter for decades
I had
before
read
sitting
that.
down to write
Yes.
books. Right now, I'm reading my first book written by Lisa Scottoline called Corrupted.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and that's about a lawyer in Philadelphia that's a criminal defense lawyer that at the top of her game. And very well done.
Oh,
Scottoline
fantastic.
also is got a wonderful gift of using dialogue
Oh,
and
well,
making you feel like you're in the room while these folks are talking to each other. So
that's
it's
great.
good.
I've heard her name for
Yeah.
years and always see her listed on the bestseller list, but yeah, I haven't read
Exactly.
her
Yeah,
yet.
no, she's great. And then I'm going to read next uh, a book that supposedly is going to tell me the history of the Eagles,
Oh, nice.
and they were great. They a great band. I won't say are or were. They're a
Yeah,
great band,
they're a great band. Lot different now than they were many years
and
ago.
and tempestuous at times internally. And
Yes.
so, and they've had a lot of people come and go, people that I uh, liked before they got to the band and after they left the band. So, and Don Felder being one of them. So, very curious to see how they treat the Felder arrival and then dismissal
I'll
in
be
the book.
curious. I want you to let me know what you think of that. I haven't read
Yeah,
any of those books yet about the Eagles either, but I've been very curious because, like most people, I mean, I've known their music for most of my life, and they do have such an interesting history. I mean, you mentioned Don Felder. I mean, he left under, some bad circumstances, and of course, you had, Glenn Fry and Don Henley, I guess, were the unofficial leaders of the band, and boy, what a history there! And the fact that they have still continued on, even though a couple of the members have passed, and
right.
it's pretty amazing. And you mentioned Connolly. I really need to read him soon. I wanted to ask, did he write a book called Poet as well? I
If he
think.
did, I haven't read that. If he
Oh, okay.
did,
I may be wrong. I had seen one recently. Someone had raved about that. That could be someone else, but he's someone I need to read. I started watching the Bosch series. I think it was on Amazon Prime or one of those many pay services. I watched 3 or 4 episodes of that, and I thought it was fantastic. So
hmm hmm
I have to check him out soon. And as for me, I might as well give my book recommendation too. I am currently reading a book. It's the second in a series that is a fairly new series called The Pacific Coast Highway Mysteries. It's by Daniel Weitzman. And the first book came out last year. It was called The Last Songbird. This new one that I'm currently reading is called Cinnamon Girl. And I'm sure a lot of you know that's a song by Neil Young.
Neil
But
Young, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm about halfway through. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. It's interesting because the main character in these books, he is a Lyft driver. And in the first book, he is a Lyft driver, and he becomes friends with that. The first book was The Last Songbird, with this sort of singer who is very much along the lines of like a Stevie Nicks. She's a legendary singer. She gets killed, but they have a tight bond. They've been friends for years because I don't know. She likes. He's also a songwriter, so they bonded, and he goes to solve her murder. And in this new book, he's actually like trying to become a private eye, but he's going through
Hmm.
steps to become a private eye, but he's also still working as a Lyft driver. So it's kind of interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, it's better than when I heard that. I'm like, okay, this driver's going around solving crimes, but it
Why
kind of
not?
contains a lot of the same elements that I like in a lot of mysteries, where sort of like the old style mysteries, where an investigator, whether they're a private eye or a cop, just keeps still continuously knocking on doors and continuously like kind of getting on people's nerves because they just keep pushing and pushing and pushing
Mhm.
till they find out, what happened. So actually a pretty compelling book. So I recommend it. I recommend The Last Songbird for sure because I read that all the way through. This one could have a horrible ending. But anyway, check out Daniel Weitzman, The Last Songbird.
Yeah,
It's pretty good.
it sounds great.
Awesome. And Mark, speaking of great, I had a great time talking with you here.
Yeah,
And
you too. And I knew I would once I got to know you on Medium. So I again really thank you for having me on. It's been fun.
oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. And to all watching, or listening, since we do both here, I thank you so much for being a part of the book Let me get the name of my show right. The Buddies Book Buddies podcast. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.